And if we can get started. Thank you. I want to welcome you all for coming to this second of our 4 planned community meetings to provide information regarding the proposed stormwater fee measure for the town of Moraga. It's great to see you all here tonight. And I'm Dave Trotter. I'm the mayor of the town of Moraga, and I've been on the council since 2006. It's nice to see a former mayor, Mike Metcalf, there at the back of the room. And I just want to welcome you all and introduce some folks who are going to be speaking here tonight. So here we have tonight, if you could just wave your hands or whatever when I get to you. In addition to me providing information from the town council, I'm pleased to have my colleague Roger Weichel here tonight. Roger, if you want to wave your hand. From town staff, we have Jim Holgerson, our interim city manager, and Edric Kwan, who is our public works director. And then we have 2 consultants. At the afternoon session, we had Frank Kennedy from Kennedy and Associates, and he's responsible for our clean water program. It's one of the unfunded mandates, and it's put on us by the Regional Water Board, but he could not be with us tonight, and somebody else will be taking his slot. We also have Robin Lee from Schaaf and Wheeler, which put together the storm drain master plan, which is the basis for this program. And we have Jerry Bradshaw from SCI, who put together the fee study that is providing some of the basis for the numbers that are being proposed for the proper related fee here that we're asking folks in town to vote on. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Roger Weichel.
All right, well, thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We're going to do some real brief self-introductions. So, again, Roger Weichel. It's my 6th year on the town council. Also happen to be a licensed professional civil engineer in the state of California and Nevada. So why are we here? So I want to leave it on this slide for a minute. So this is the infamous sinkhole right down the street here at Ream Boulevard. This is what everybody saw from above as it was happening. But what you can't see are all the utilities that are underneath the ground there, to include a PG&E high-pressure gas line that signal light foundation actually fell on and ruptured. So we were very fortunate that we had some first responders on the site immediately, got PG&E out here, and they were able to shut off the gas, so there was no explosion. And again, as bad as the sinkhole was, and it took us a while for us to repair, mainly because of reimbursement issues, it could have been much, much worse. So why are we here? So this sinkhole, this is underground. Let me just cover that real quick. So this is the culvert that's underneath the ground of the picture I just showed you on the last slide. It's a 8-foot in diameter corrugated metal pipe culvert, so CMP. Typically CMPs have a lifespan of about 50 years, and that's about where we are with this one. It rusted out in the bottom, and what happens is they corrode. Water goes through the corrosion. All the fine material in the soils are washed away. Holes get bigger material gets washed away, and eventually you have a void, and everything above it falls into the hole. So this cost us about $3.3 million. We fully expect most of that will be reimbursed, but it's going to take quite a bit of time. So we said, all right, what are we going to do about this? So we conducted a survey last fall to kind of assess the public's opinion and check their pulse on the issue. And we were happy to see that 87.5% of the respondents value the town's quality of life. And also 2/3 want to upgrade this aging storm drain system. We also asked, okay, that's one thing to do that, but would you mind paying for it? And sure enough, Moraga homeowners were clearly interested in a local funding option to address these needs. So we're going to try to speed up our presentation as much as possible and leave some time for questions at the end. So I have one more slide here, just kind of give you a timeline on where we've been more recently. So I applaud the town council back in 2009, it was prior to my time, when they developed the Revenue Enhancement Committee. They came up with some critical areas that need investment. They were the roads and storm drains primarily. So the roads were considered to be the highest priority at the time. They started working on that, and that was passed back in 2012, and then the street program was rolled out in 2013. I think it's important to note here, as part of the road program, if we're going to redo a road, do a full reclamation type of project, and there's a storm drain underlaying it, we will use Measure K funds to fix the storm drains. But it's only isolated areas, mainly catch basins and things that are closer to the surface of the road. So after Measure K was done, we said, all right, let's turn our attention to storm drain master plan. So we had the master plan was authorized in 2014, completed and adopted in 2015. So we went out again to kind of say, all right, what are the top priorities for the town? That was done in 2016. Again, storm drains were high on the list. So we looked at various funding options for how we're going to tackle this, and we did a follow-up survey in 2017 with some actual dollar amounts and how they tested. And again, they were supported by the town during that survey. So that's it for me. I'm going to bring up our interim town manager, Jim Holgerson, to go over some fiscal slides.
Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm Jim Holgerson, interim town manager from Moraga, and really enjoying being here. My own background is that I've had the wonderful opportunity to manage in 8 different communities in 5 different states over the last 4 decades. I was 6 when I started. And it's been a wonderful experience that if I had it to do over again, I'd do it over again. But one of the things that it's provided for me is a pretty good handle on finances and budget. My first budget was in 1974. I was really very interested in looking at Moraga's finances, especially since all communities always wonder about how healthy their community is. And I want to report to you all that this community has been amazing with what it's been able to accomplish, especially with its challenge on the revenue side. Certainly we could go through a long presentation on making that point, but I just wanted to pick out a few different benchmarks to help illustrate that point. So let me first find the clicker. You can tell I'm old tech. Let's see, this one, right? No, this one, there. So fiscal sustainability, obviously that's a long-term challenge for any community. And as I mentioned, the revenue challenge for Moraga is quite unique. I don't know that there's any other community that gets a smallest share of the property tax as Moraga does. But when you look at that graph, you'll see that this community, the leadership here, the political leadership, the council, and the management itself has kept that red line, if you will, that's expenditures below the revenue, no matter how challenged it is, and has been consistent about that in terms of every year that the city has existed. So there's always been hard work to keep expenses down and to work within the revenue model that we have. So there's a history of effective management, working within the available resources, those precious resources that we as citizens provide to the town. Challenge-wise, and you just heard Roger speak to that this city is willing to tackle those deferred maintenance issues that a lot of towns and cities don't or can't or won't. The streets is the first example that's cited, and there'll be more discussion about that in a bit. Unfunded liabilities also include things like we're talking about now, the stormwater. It includes things like our parks and park facilities and buildings, and the importance of, like the private sector does, of creating depreciation schedules that take care of that infrastructure for the community. Moraga's been stepping forward, asking the community if it wants to line up to take care of these things, and the community has responded in a positive way. But also, Moraga has been very good at, in fact, leveraging the resources that it receives in terms of grants with the federal and state government, in terms of community participation, such as the Rotary in this most recently opened access playground. It's just, if you've been by there, it's beautiful to see all the kids playing there day after day. So let's just look at the revenue picture, just one sort of graphic, and I think this is right there, 5.32, in other words, a nickel of every dollar. So clearly, with the average assessed homes at $1 million to $1.2 million in Moraga, that $10,000 average tax bill, that's a big piece. But actually, if you only paid your taxes to Moraga, it'd be $532. And when you think about what you get back for $532, if you divide that, it's a little over $40 a month. That's a pretty good return on your investment. And as you can see here, again, looking at that dollar bill, Moraga's nickel. On the other end of that is the schools at 40 cents on the dollar. But that's important, that's to educate our kids. And of course, the Contra Costa County, other jurisdictions, the Moraga Orinda Fire District, all those other services that are provided and their share of that particular tax bill. When you look at the expenditure side, just a couple again of benchmarks. Very fiscally conservative of all the communities in the area. Communities that compare to Moraga, 481, or one of the lowest per capita you'll probably find of any community in terms of, and this is general fund, in terms of maximizing those dollars and providing the best services we can with what we have. And when you look at staffing, a lot of people might be surprised by this, but really it's been, the mayor wouldn't be surprised by this, but it's been pretty level, anywhere ranging over the last 10 years from 32 employees to 36. About a third of those are police. When we think about all the services from parks to community development to planning to code enforcement, you name it, finance, all of that, that's all within that staffing model. So with that, I'm going to turn to Jerry Bradshaw, who's with CSI, our consultant, who's going to talk about the study fee itself. Thank you. The storm study fee.
Thanks. I'm Jerry Bradshaw with SCI Consulting Group. We were hired to do the financial work on this and the rate study to come up with this. Before I worked for SCI, I spent 20 years working for cities, a couple of cities in the Bay Area. I was public works director and city engineer, so I was in this exact field for the cities I worked with. In fact, my last stint was with the city of El Cerrito, just over the hill here in Contra Costa County. And while I was there, Moraga was going through the workup for what became Measure K, trying to figure out how to apply some resources to get their streets fixed. And they asked me to come over and give them a hand. And because we had done a similar measure a couple years before in El Cerrito that turned out really well. We got that measure passed and did some amazing work with our streets. So they wanted to tap into that experience I had. So I was able to work with the Town of Moraga back in 2011 and 2012, just as during the build up to what became Measure K. So I know a little bit about the city, and I'm really happy to be back. So we're here talking about implementation of a storm drain fee. We'll walk you through the why and the what and the how in a little bit. And I want to talk to you about the process. But first, I want to put all this in a little bit of context. The cartoon you see up there, that little diagram, shows a typical residential street. The houses and the street and the sidewalks there. And most of you realize that under the street are all the utilities are buried in the street that serve all the properties and help make it a nice neighborhood. So you're familiar with a lot of those. I'm just going to walk through. And most of those are utilities. You pay utility bills on those. For instance, the water and the sewer line. You pay a water bill to East Bay Mud, and you pay your sewer to Central Sand. And over on the other side, you see the PG&E gas line, electric line, phone line, cable TV. And those are all utilities that you pay a monthly bill for in one fashion or another. That last pipe you see there is in the middle. That's the storm drain pipe, but there's no storm drain bill. You don't get a utility bill for the storm drain. That's very common for cities in the Bay Area and California and to some extent across the country. Storm drain utilities are kind of the forgotten child out there. But that's quickly becoming a bigger and bigger problem for all cities, just like it is here in Moraga. We've tried to put some dollar numbers to all these bills you might be facing each winter. Water bill, 65 or maybe more. I think a lot of you maybe pay a little more than that. Sewer bill, around 45. PG&E and Comcast can range all over the place, but they're usually into 3 figures at some point. The stormwater bill, what we're looking at is about $10 a month for the average home. So that's some context I wanted to put in place and kind of gives you a historical perspective of what the storm drain utility picture has looked like. The process I want to talk about is something I think it's important because this process we're going through isn't something most of you have been through before. In fact, it's kind of new to the state. In 1996, the voters of California passed Proposition 218. It was brought to you by our friends at Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and you may know that name from Proposition 13. They're the authors of that, and that's where they got their big start. So they put together the Right to Vote on Taxes Act in 1996, and it was made part of the Constitution, and is literally the grandson of Prop 13. I remember when I first started working for cities in the early 90s, we used to, in order to implement a fee, we would just adopt a fee and put it in place. And people would cry, well, what about Prop 13? You have to vote on that. And we would say, it's not a tax, it's a fee. And I think there was a lot of that going on, and probably more than there should have been. So Howard Jarvis decided those were some loopholes they needed to close, and maybe rightly so. In any event, we have Prop 218 which is our guiding document, our guiding law in this situation. The storm drain fee is called a property-related fee, and that was a category that was created by Proposition 218. They had never had a category for that thing before, so they did that, and it is for the types of fees like your water fees, sewer fees, and garbage fees. And that's what they had in mind when they wrote that. And they put in a two-step process, a public hearing, and then it has to go to a ballot process. And then in the next sentence, they promptly exempted water, sewer, and garbage from that ballot process. So I'm not sure what they had in mind for the ballot process, but it's still there in the Constitution. And then some people started saying, what about stormwater? That's not mentioned. So it took the courts to settle that question because some cities did pass a stormwater fee without going to a ballot. And the courts decided, no, you need to go to a ballot measure to pass a stormwater fee or to increase a stormwater fee. So it goes to the vote of property owners. So that's the situation we're in. That's why the town will have to go to a ballot measure for this, and ultimately you all get to decide whether this fee gets adopted or not. The process, like I mentioned, is two steps. There's a public hearing, which starts with a notice that's mailed to all the property owners in town. And you probably have got an example of one here. I think you all got a copy of that in the mail. That's why you're probably here tonight. And there, this thing here, it's 5 pages. It's got some legal requirements on the front and then some tables about what the rates are, you know, some projects that need to be done and so forth. So that's a summary of the whole process. Then they have a public hearing. And incidentally, it's not just a public hearing, but there's a right for people to protest the fee process as it goes forward. In fact, as the law is written, if a majority of property owners in town put a protest in, then that stops the process. It's defeated, and you can't go forward, not for another year anyway. So that's why it's in the industry, it's called a protest hearing. So that hearing is scheduled for March 14th. After that, if we get through that process, the next step would be to mail ballots out to all the property owners in town. And those would go out by the end of March, and they would be due back May 15th. So that's the process. Now you see some graphics up there. That kind of gives you an idea what the ballot packet will look like. First of all, and I don't have a picture of that, it's gonna come in an envelope that looks a lot like that, big red letters, official ballot enclosed, and the law actually states what size of font you have to use and so forth in the words. So it comes like that, has the return address and seal of the city on it. And inside will be some sort of ballot guide and instructions on what to do and explain what the fee would be for, what the money would be used for, and how much it would be, similar to the notice you got. So this is one from another measure we did a few years back. It's not for the one here. We haven't finished up the one from Moraga yet. And then it would have a ballot. This ballot's yellow because it was going to be a replacement ballot for another measure, but they usually come there white. It looks a lot different than the ballot you get from the county elections office. So that's why we take a minute to kind of explain the process. It's a simple ballot just for the Moraga storm drain fee. Place to mark yes or no. You sign it. On the back is the information with how many parcels you own and all the rates for the different parcels and some instructions on there. So that's the ballot packet, and we thought it was important to introduce you to that. One last thing, it comes with a return envelope, postage paid, so you don't have to invest in a stamp. We want to make it as convenient as possible to get through the process. So that's the process. I'll be back up a little later to talk about the fees themselves. In the meantime, I'll hand it over to Edric. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, good evening. My name is Edric Kwan, and I'm your Public Works Director and Town Engineer. I've been with the town for over 5.5 years now, and over my 20-year career after working for many other cities, one thing is clear. Storm drain infrastructure is aging and failing throughout California due to the lack of funding dedicated to servicing stormwater systems. For example, before Moraga, I served as the city engineer for Richmond, and we faced repairing a massive sinkhole as well, caused by a collapsed creek culvert costing Richmond $12 million. So a dedicated funding source allows for this town to proactively address our aging infrastructure instead of reacting to unplanned, expensive storm drain failures. So to start, I'm going to go through some definitions. I want to first define what we mean by stormwater system. A stormwater system consists of facilities made up of man-made pipes, inlets and outlets, all of which convey runoff into the creeks that serve as the backbone to the stormwater system. While most of these creeks are on private property, sections are man-made, such as the culverts that run underneath the road crossings, and those are also considered as part of the facilities. So that's the definitions of facilities, all of these various man-made structures as it relates to a stormwater system. Next, I want to define what these services mean. It really is the collection, conveyance, and overall management of runoff from impervious surfaces. And as well as the protection of water quality by keeping pollutants out of our drinking water system, the drinking water system, because our creeks eventually end up at the Upper San Leandro Reservoir, which East Bay Mud eventually treats and distributes to the Bay Area. So services for stormwater is very similar to sewer and water. Just like stormwater, both utilities need to be treated and conveyed to and from your home. And so the last bit of that definition is what is the service area, and that basically is the entire city, the entire town. With that, I'm going to go right into the first leg of the fee, which involves with the capital improvements, and I'm going to introduce Robin Lee with Schaaf and Wheeler, who conducted the storm drain master plan, to go into the capital portion of the fee.
Hello, I'm Robin Lee. I work with Schaaf and Wheeler. We are a water resources engineering firm. We've done storm drain master plans for over 20 jurisdictions throughout the Bay Area, including the neighboring Orinda. I myself have over 12 years of experience in engineering, both in water and sewer and storm drainage. I find storm drainage the most fascinating because as an engineer, it requires the most creative solutions. I think it's a lot more challenging than water and sewer. So back in 2014, Edric and I sat down and he came into the meeting with some very large paper maps to show the storm drain system. And I said, you have this electronically, right? CAD, GIS, anything I can put on the computer? And he said, no. This stack, these are our maps. So step one in our process was to bring those paper maps into digital. And so we did that in GIS. So now the town has the ability to overlay their pipes onto aerials, onto street view, and gets a better sense of where the system is. And then for us, we were able to take that network and put it into models. And we were also able to get our crews, we developed maps, and we had 2 different subconsultants do top level and underground assessments. So I do apologize, engineering is filled with acronyms. The first one here is CCTV, closed circuit televising. That's when we send cameras through the pipes. And we had crews doing condition from the top level. So that's trying to look at pipes to see how they're deteriorating, how they're wearing, what ones need maintenance and what ones need replacing. And we tried to do as much as we can, but we're not able to televise every single pipe within the town. So that's why Edric is going to talk about maintenance issues later on as well. There were streets being paved at the same time that we were doing the storm drain master plan. So those streets, we also sent the cameras and the crews to see if those pipes should have maintenance or be replaced during the same time. And then we built what are called H&H, hydrologic and hydraulic models. Basically, we simulate rainfall onto the ground, runoff getting into pipes, and then those pipes conveying the water to the creeks. So that's the entire system that Edric was talking about. We build models, and then we try and look and identify areas where pipes are undersized, so they're not conveying an adequate level of service. So in the Bay Area, we consider the storm drain system to contain a 10-year storm and the creek system to convey that 100-year storm event. From these models and from the condition assessment that we did, we come up with capital improvement projects. Those are CIPs, and then those are all lumped into what is known as the Storm Drain Master Plan. That's a document. It's an overview of the system. It's a very high-level assessment of the storm drain system. and that was adopted by City Council in 2015. So now some fun parts, some pictures. What we found during that 1.5-year study was that some of the corrugated metal pipes, or CMPs, are in okay condition, and some of them are not. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner that corrugated metal pipe has completely lost the bottom of the pipe. It is completely eroded away. And generally, we think of corrugated metal pipes having a lifespan of 50 years, so this is not uncommon. They do deteriorate. Good news is that the majority of the system is concrete pipe, and concrete pipe lasts. There's a reason why the Roman Empire was so great, and that's concrete. It lasts, it does really well. But sometimes stuff gets stuck into that pipe. And this is one of the things that's really hard, is when you're standing up above a pipe, there's no way of knowing what's down below. And so that's what the importance of the CCTV, or the televising inspection. That's actually a picture from the little camera in the pipe showing a bunch of debris in the pipe. And if that's in the pipe, then it can cause flooding issues. So ultimately, we took all these different projects and we rank them, and or we prioritize them. And we prioritize them based on the impact to the community. So if it's a pipe that's very large and has a potential to create a very large sinkhole, that's a very high priority project. If it's a pipe that is maybe very high in the headwaters and is smaller, and the potential impact to the community is lower, then that is in the low priority. And what we're here today talking about, and Jerry's gonna tell you more about this, is the high priority projects. So the roughly $9 million worth of improvement projects. And those improvement projects are broken down into the different categories. So we have the storm drain capacity projects. Those are the ones that came from the models that we built. Then we have the storm drain conditions. That comes from the televising and the crews that looked at the structures from the ground. And we have the projects that are coinciding with street pavement projects. And then finally, we have the creek culverts. So those are the large creek crossings under roadways. And now I'm going to hand it back to Edric.
Thank you, Robin. So Robin first talked about the first element of the fee. I'm going to talk to you about the second two elements. The first of which is the maintenance portion of it, the operation and maintenance element. Currently, with inadequate funding, we are being very reactive when it comes to the maintenance issues out there. We're able to annually go through all the storm drain inlets to look inside and see if they're full of debris, and then able to remove it. But we're not able to conduct a thorough program, and I'll go into more details with that. So for this particular case, some of the maintenance issues that we do see are situations where outfall structures are full of debris. We see clogged inlets that are causing localized flooding, as well as pipes full of silt, which then reduces capacity and again, potentially flooding in your neighborhoods. So the maintenance improvements, if a program were to be put into place, will require video inspection of our stormwater system on a routine basis to assess its conditions. This allows for the town to identify and remove settlement and debris before they accumulate and cause flooding problems. Additionally, if isolated damage is encountered, spot repairs can be completed before the damage gets worse and leads to more costly failures like the sinkhole that we've experienced down the street. And this O&M, operation and maintenance program, is really a critical component of the stormwater system services, mainly because it will help extend the life of some of those moderate and low priority projects. If we're able to go in there and stabilize it, that life would be longer and it won't get to the point where it could become potentially a high priority project or a failure. So when we're out there with our O&M program and videoing these pipes, if we see a pipe walls riddled with holes, we can efficiently line that pipe segment. If we see buckling, in this particular case, we can efficiently remove and replace that particular pipe section through a spot repair. If we see the bottom of the pipe full of silt, we can deploy a vector truck out there and vacuum it out. And if we see the bottom of a pipe really missing, like in this case, we can go through there and resurface the invert of the pipe. And then in all those cases, those pipes as a whole does last longer. It doesn't require for us to go in and replace the entire pipe itself. So that really is the main piece with the O&M element of our program. The third leg of the fee is about clean water requirements. And just like water and sewer utilities, stormwater requires mandated treatment. The Federal Clean Water Act of 1972 requires states to issue what we call an NPDES permit. It's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which really doesn't mean anything in our terms, but what it really means is clean water permit, things that we have to do in order to preserve our waters in the creek and the bay. And this includes a variety of different elements that the town is mandated to complete. And unfortunately, it's an unfunded mandate. And this includes removing basically all the trash from entering into our waters at a pretty close date. I think in about 2020 or 2022 is when we have to have zero trash. And that's something the agency has to deal with. We also require low impact development to treat the runoff off of any new subdivisions and developments that occur, as well as making sure that they're maintaining those facilities properly. We are required to also install green infrastructure, and those are things like bioswales and bioretention to treat runoff. And this is going to be part of our capital improvement projects. So our projects will trigger these requirements, and we would start installing some of these green infrastructure elements to treat it before it goes into the system. Other things such as hydromodification, and what that means is before we paved the roads, before we had buildings, it was nature. And when water ran off into the creek, that flow is that flow. But once we put the impervious surface in, now there's more water going into that. And so what hydromodification requires for us to do is to hold on to that water and release it at pre-existing conditions. And so things such as cisterns or underground vaults are now becoming a requirement to make sure that runoff goes at the pre-existing condition. Other requirements include integrated pest management, and that's really about not utilizing chemical pesticides and herbicides in our application with our landscapes and to control vector issues. And because again, those chemicals go into the creek. But fortunately for the town, we were forward thinkers back then when we adopted our IPM program. And in fact, about four or 5 years ago, we did win an award for the best IPM program. So something we're proud of, and again, that's something that we are mandated to do. And lastly, we do need to deal with these legacy pollutants that came about before our time here when we didn't know the effects of mercury and PCB, and now we are required to collect a certain amount quantitatively in order to be in compliance with the permit. So this laundry list of different requirements to maintain our clean water is an unfunded mandate and an important element of this fee that, that we're bringing to you today. So that's the third portion of it. I'm going to now hand it back to Jerry to go through and talk about the stormwater rates and how they're calculated.
Thanks, Cedric. So we've been getting a lot of questions about how we calculated the fee and what's it based on. Just like with any utility, water system or sewer system, we try and allocate the costs on a fair share basis. So all the properties should pay just their fair share of what it costs to handle all the stormwater in town. And we use the amount of impermeable surfaces. That's a word Edric used just a moment ago, but let me kind of explain that. Take this sponge. If you were to sprinkle water on that and simulate rainfall, the water would permeate into that. So it's a very permeable surface. But if you were to plaster over part of that, maybe a little miniature house, a driveway, back porch, then that's not permeable anymore. The water wouldn't soak into the sponge, it's impermeable. So we can calculate the amount of impermeable surface on basically all the parcels in town, and come up with how much fair share of impermeable surfaces different types of properties have. And that's what we've done throughout the town. We didn't do every single parcel in town. We did it in groups of classifications because there's about 6,000 parcels in town, so that would be a little more than what that is worth it. We broke it into two basic categories, residential and then non-residential. 95% of the parcels are in the residential category, but they come in smaller lots and bigger lots. So we broke those into 4 lot sizes, small, medium, large, and very large. And you can see the sizes in the rates schedule that we'll get to a little later. And we just sampled a good sampling of each one, like about 5 or 10% of the number of parcels in each group, and came up with what an average amount of impermeability is on a percentage basis. We applied the percentage to the medium-sized parcel in that group, and there we come up with how much impermeable surface. So we have all the residential figured out. Then we went to the non-residential, and that's a different animal, because you can't lump those in size categories because a commercial site could be a half acre, like maybe where 7-Eleven is, or it could be 10 or 15 acres like a shopping center, yet they're the same type of commercial use. So what we did instead is broke it into categories that have like impermeability, similar impermeability characteristics. For instance, commercial is one category, office is another category, schools and other institutions which have bigger green areas is another category. And we took samplings of those, and in some cases there's so few, we actually measured all of them and took an average of the whole group. And then we came up and related that to the average size of a single family equivalent, and then we could spread that over all the properties in town. So it's all based on impermeable surfaces and fair share. Incidentally, like I said, 95% of the parcels in town are residential, but they are only carrying about 74% of the financial burden, which is understandable. Commercial properties have a lot more impermeable surfaces with parking lots and so forth. They don't have yards and green areas in the same proportion that homes do. We ran into an interesting situation here we don't see in every town, and that's 22% of the storm drain system is actually in private hands. You have some HOAs that have large areas of private streets and private storm drains, where in a lot of towns, those would be handed to the city when they built the subdivision, but not always. Some cities have them stay private. In this case, about 22% of the system is in private hands, but it's still a collective system. It's built just like a municipal system. It's just funded through the HOA instead of through the town. So since those homes in those areas are carrying some of that burden on a kind of a parallel basis, we try to calculate what a discount would be so that we would recognize that they're paying part of their stormwater burden to someone else. So we did that. We worked up a table, and I'm not going to try and go through all that with you. But the column on the right, you see $632,000 is about 80% of our annual storm drain need. And then we applied the 22% reduction factor to that 80% of the need. And that came up with a 17.7% discount is how much they would have. So we've put that in place. We've talked to several of the HOAs, and that sort of made sense to them. So we think that's a fair way to go, because above all, Prop 218 requires us to be fair to all the property owners in town. So this is what you saw in the notice you got. This is the rate schedule. As you see on top is the residential rates for the 4 different size of parcels. And in the middle is the same structure, except it's for the discounted parcels. So there's the rate for the ones that have those HOA parallel burdens. And at the bottom is those 6 categories of non-residential. Now, if you work those annual rates out to some monthly rates, as you see on the left, average home would be about $10 a month. A 5-acre commercial parcel, and there's a few of those in town, would be about $392 a month. And a 10-acre school site, which is the average size of the elementary schools here, would be $338 per month. So that gives you an idea of what the end result was of the rate structure that we put together. There's a few other features of the rates that go beyond just the numbers. There's fiscal controls and accountability. Proposition 218 requires that the money collected for storm drainage can only be used for storm drainage, and it has to be put into a separate fund, so it's not commingled with the general fund. So the council, town manager can't take this money and go buy a police car or a new playground or something like that. It has to go for storm drain work only, as defined in the rate study. And because it's set aside, all the annual audits will identify this fund all by itself. You can see what came into the fund, what was expended from the fund, and you might see examples of what it was spent on. and there'd be a citizen oversight structure put in place similar to what you have for the Measure K streets program. We do include annual cost indexing to cover for inflation, and that's capped at 3% per year. So if the consumer price index goes up more than 3%, you can only increase this by 3%. But it has to be reviewed every year by the city council to take a look at what the consumer price index is, to set what rate, if they need the full amount or just part of it, and then set the rate for the next year. So that's built into the rate study. We don't include a sunset clause. A sunset clause is where the measure would end after a certain number of years. You see some of these that would end after 7 years or 10 years or 15 years. We don't do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, storm drain obligations and the responsibilities go on and on. There's no end in sight for doing the maintenance and doing the clean water requirements. The capital program could end at some point because it's somewhat finite, but as we figure it could take at least 30 years, especially if you finance this through some sort of debt structure, you may want to finance it for 30 years. So you have to have a fee in place for that whole 30 years. So even if you did consider a sunset clause, it would be at least 30 years out, which isn't very meaningful for the voters who want to see a sunset clause, because you're thinking about your kids and grandkids at that point. But also beyond that, keep in mind, this rate only includes the high priority. Now, the low priority and medium priority will be taken care of to some extent, through the maintenance and operations program that Edric talked about, trying to extend the life of those pipe, but sooner or later, they're going to need to be replaced too. So it made sense for this to go on indefinitely, but again, it's subject to annual review by the town council, and you always have a voice there. There's an appeals process if you feel like your parcel is not calculated right or is put in the wrong category or something's wrong with that. There'll be a process in place for you to come and talk to the people at the town to see if that was done right, and if it needs adjustment, it can be adjusted. So the final thing on the process is the next steps. We have some more community meetings. We had one this afternoon and this one here. We're having 2 more meetings a week from Tuesday, also over at the Hacienda. So let your friends and neighbors know about that if they're interested. The formal council hearing is set up for March 14th. That's when it's scheduled for. And if they go beyond that, then they would mail ballots a couple weeks later, the end of March. And the ballots are due back May 15th, so they'll be out a month and a half out on the street for people to vote. The ballots are mailed back to the town clerk. The town clerk is the official tabulator here. Doesn't go to the county elections office, so the county has nothing to do with this. It's an entirely local process. And the tabulation will be done in a public place if any of you are interested in coming and watching the tabulation of these ballots. It can be interesting, at least for the first few minutes, and it gets kind of boring after that, but you're certainly welcome to come and watch. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to the mayor. Go from here.
Thank you, Jerry, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight to learn more about this proposed storm drain-related fee. And basically, we're done. We're only about 45 minutes in. The remainder of our time here is going to be taking questions from anybody, any questions that you have. But just before we get there, just want to speak to the town's vision here and what we're trying to accomplish here. This fee is part of an effort on the part of the town to maintain our local quality of life, which we all value, and of course to protect our property values, because if you've got, bad storm drains and sinkholes, and you don't have all of those essential services, that can adversely affect one's property values. We also, of course, are here tonight because we do want to engage everybody in the public in a transparent and quality manner. And we want to address Moraga's aging storm drain infrastructure before it becomes more expensive to do so in the future. It's pretty much axiomatic that if you can catch things before they fail, you will spend less money in the long run. And so we do value your input. And, the things that we're trying to accomplish here are basically, 3. One is to repair our deteriorating pipes and infrastructure to prevent system failure and future sinkholes. It's also important that we protect Clean East Bay mud drinking water, which benefits all of us. And we want to protect the town against future flooding. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming. This is a time when we would love to have feedback from the community. And we'll start now. If you have, I guess, if you belong to other organizations that need to know this information, we can certainly send somebody from the town to try to explain what this is all about. Would also encourage you to stay informed by visiting the town's website, where there is a current link to storm drain funding, and more information will be placed there over the course of the next several weeks as we move forward.